Colonel Kunio Nakagawa could feel it in his bones. Japan was finished. It was late 1944. The American tide had smashed through the Solomons, the Gilberts, the Marshalls, and the Marianas. The so-called National Defense Zone had been breached. Now they were coming for Peleliu, his island, his command. He refused to let it be just another stepping stone for the American giant. He wouldn't be humiliated. If this were the end, it would be on his terms. So he began planning something no Japanese commander had dared attempt: a trap to bleed Marines. On September 15th, the Japanese commander watched as the overconfident US Marines stormed the beaches of Peleliu. Nakagawa would make them pay for what they had done to the Empire. And for that, he built the closest thing to hell the Marines would ever know. The Americans had it all figured out. By September 1944, they'd perfected the art of island warfare. Hit the beaches hard with naval bombardment, overwhelm the Japanese defenders at the waterline, push inland, raise the flag, move on to the next island. It was a formula written in blood across the Pacific, and it had never failed them. Admiral Chester Nimitz's eyes were already on the Philippines. The tiny island of Peleliu was just another speed bump. 5 square miles of coral and jungle, 500 miles east of their real objective. Allied strategists had determined that the Japanese airstrip there could threaten MacArthur's return to the Philippines. So it had to go. Simple as that. Major General William Rupertus radiated confidence as he briefed his Marines. The 1st Marine Division, 17,000 of America's finest, would crush the 10,000 Japanese defenders. The Navy's guns would pulverize their beach defenses. The Marines would storm ashore. The Japanese would perish in their bunkers by naval shell fire or charge hopelessly straight into machine gun fire, just like they always did. Rupertus declared, grinning, "3 days, gentlemen." Surely it wouldn't take longer. The intelligence reports seemed to confirm it. Aerial reconnaissance showed typical, if somewhat weak, Japanese beach fortifications. Nothing the Marines hadn't seen and destroyed a dozen times before. Nobody questioned why the Japanese hadn't reinforced the beaches more heavily. Nobody wondered why the reconnaissance photos showed so little activity in the island's interior. They should have. Colonel Kunio Nakagawa had spent months turning Peleliu into something the Marines had never encountered before. September 15th, 1944, was D-Day in Peleliu. For 3 days, the Navy had pounded Peleliu with everything it had. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers all focused on the beaches where the Japanese made their stand. Thousands of shells turned sand and coral into a moonscape. Little could have survived. The first wave of Marines hit the beaches at 8:32 a.m. Within seconds, they knew something was terribly wrong. The Japanese weren't on the beaches, they were in them, hidden behind steel doors built into the coral cliffs. As the Marines scrambled for cover, those steel doors swung open and hell poured out. 47mm anti-tank guns, 20mm cannons, mortars dropping from invisible positions. In the first hour, 60 Amtraks, the Marines' armored landing vehicles, were burning wrecks. Legendary U.S. Marine Colonel Louis Chesty Puller, commanding the 1st Marines, was nearly lost when a shell slammed into his landing craft. Luckily, it didn't explode. His communications team wasn't so fortunate. A direct hit vaporized them and their equipment. Puller was landing blind and deaf. On Orange Beach, Marines hugged the coral as Japanese gunners methodically worked them over. The pre-invasion bombardment had been worse than useless. It had created more hiding spots for the enemy. Every crater became a trap. Every piece of blasted coral provided cover for Japanese riflemen. The 5th Marines pushed toward the airfield through coconut groves that provided blessed concealment. They made it halfway before Nakagawa sprang another surprise, a counterattack by tanks. Not a banzai charge, but a calculated thrust designed to split the Marine advance. Only concentrated firepower from American tanks, artillery, and dive bombers stopped it. By nightfall, the Marines held the beaches and nothing else. But the cost was significant. 200 lost, 900 wounded. But Rupertus still thought they'd wrap this up in 2 more days. Day 2 dawned like the gates of hell opening. The temperature soared past 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Marines in full combat gear began dropping from heat exhaustion before the shooting even started. Then came the water crisis. Someone had shipped their water supply in oil drums that hadn't been properly cleaned. Men who drank it violently vomited, becoming casualties without ever seeing a Japanese soldier. The 5th Marines pushed for the airfield again, and this time they took it. But it wasn't the definitive victory they expected. As they crossed the open ground, artillery fire from the high ground to the north, a towering mass of coral ridges the maps called Umurbrogol Mountain, carved gaps in their ranks. The horrible truth began to dawn on the American commanders. The Japanese weren't defending Peleliu in the traditional sense. They turned the entire island into a single, fortified position. Those coral ridges weren't just terrain features, they were honeycombed with interconnected caves, tunnels, and fighting positions. Natural caves had been expanded and linked. Multiple entrances ensured that no single attack could seal them. Angled entries deflected flamethrower bursts and grenades. Nakagawa had learned from every Japanese defeat. No more wasting men in banzai charges. No more trying to hold beaches under naval bombardment. Instead, he'd created a defense in depth that used Peleliu's terrain like a weapon. By day 3, with the airfield barely secured and casualties mounting horrifically, even Rupertus had to admit his 3-day prediction was fantasy. The Marines started using their captured prize to launch airstrikes, dropping napalm on cave entrances. The Japanese simply retreated deeper into their tunnel systems and waited. The real battle for Peleliu was just about to begin. What followed was a descent into the worst nightmare imaginable for an infantryman. The Marines had to take Umurbrogol Mountain. Each assault began the same way. Marines advancing under smoke cover, trying to get close enough to caves to attack them with flamethrowers and demolition charges. Japanese machine guns would open up, cutting down Americans caught in the open. Snipers picked off anyone who showed themselves. Mortars dropped from reverse slopes no one could see. The Japanese weaponized fear. They deliberately targeted stretcher bearers, knowing that every wounded Marine demanded multiple rescuers, turning each casualty into a trap and every act of compassion into an ambush. At night, they infiltrated American lines, slipping into foxholes to take out sleeping Marines with knives. The Americans responded by digging 2-man positions, one man sleeping while the other stood watch, neither getting real rest. Then came Bloody Nose Ridge. Major Raymond Davis's 1st Battalion, 1st Marines drew the assignment. Take Hill 100. What followed was 6 days of the most brutal fighting in Marine Corps history. The Japanese had turned every fold of coral into a strongpoint. Machine guns covered every approach. When Marines managed to reach one position, they'd find themselves under fire from 3 others they hadn't even seen. By the time Davis pulled his shattered battalion back, they'd lost over 70% of their forces, all for one hill on one ridge, on an island that was supposed to fall in 3 days. Captain Everett Pope's company got the next crack at it. 90 men pushed deep into the ridge complex, fighting all day to reach what Pope thought was Hill 100 summit. It wasn't. It was just another ridge, crawling with Japanese. Surrounded, out of ammunition, Pope's Marines fought with knives, fists, and coral rocks through a hellish night. When relief finally reached them at dawn, only 9 men remained, out of 90. October became November. The 3-day operation stretched past a month. The 1st Marine Division, Rupertus's proud unit, was being ground to nothing. Companies that had landed with 250 men were down to 30 or 40 effectives. Platoons were commanded by sergeants because all the officers were dead. Men who'd survived Guadalcanal and Cape Gloucester said Peleliu was worse. Much worse. The Army's 81st Infantry Division had to be brought in to finish what the Marines couldn't. Even then, the carnage continued. Nakagawa and his men fought with a discipline and ferocity that stunned the Americans. No surrender. Just calculated resistance designed to exact maximum casualties. When it finally ended, when the last Japanese positions were blown shut, when Nakagawa committed harakiri rather than surrender, the toll was staggering. Over 6,500 Marine casualties, 3,300 Army casualties, nearly 10,000 Americans were lost or wounded for 5 square miles of coral. The island was not declared secure until November 27, 1944. The Japanese lost everything, over 10,000 men. But they'd achieved something remarkable. They'd proven that Americans could be hurt badly if they were willing to pay the price. The lessons of Peleliu would echo through Iwo Jima and Okinawa, where the Japanese refined Nakagawa's tactics. But it had all been for nothing. It didn't take long for assessments to conclude that Peleliu was completely unnecessary. The airfield played no significant role in the liberation of the Philippines. The Japanese garrison couldn't have interfered with MacArthur's return. Nearly 10,000 Americans bled for nothing. But the military buried the story. It was too embarrassing, too painful. Rupertus's 3 days prediction had attracted only 6 correspondents, and they'd left when the story got complicated. The 1st Marine Division was so shattered it couldn't fight again until Okinawa. Hundreds of bodies were never recovered, sealed forever in collapsed caves. Even today, efforts continue to find Americans who gave their lives in a battle that should never have been fought.